4:19 a.m. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrowest navigable channel. 21 miles of open water between the Iranian coast to the north and the Omani coastline to the south. The single choke point through which 35% of the world's seaborne crude oil transited every day. The arterial passage of the global energy economy, the geographic reality that gave Iran its most consequential strategic card, regardless of every other dimension of its military capability. The morning watch was on duty aboard the crude oil tanker MV Pacific Endeavour, a VLCC of 320,000 deadweight tons, loaded with 2 million barrels of Saudi crude, transiting eastbound through the traffic separation scheme's inbound lane toward the open waters of the Gulf of Oman. Her bridge team was conducting a routine approach, the pre-dawn visibility clear, the radar picture normal. Container ships and tankers in both lanes, the familiar geometry of the world's busiest energy corridor in the pre-dawn darkness. At 4:19 a.m., the radar operator reported a new contact directly ahead in the inbound lane. Stationary, close, bearing 084 at 3.2 miles. No AIS signal. A vessel with no identification stopped dead in the navigable channel. The helmsman began his avoidance maneuver. At 3 miles in a loaded VLCC doing 12 knots, the stopping and turning distances available were measured in miles, not meters. The contact at 3 miles was already inside the minimum safe maneuvering distance. MV Pacific Endeavour grounded on the sunken hull at 4:23 a.m. The impact was not catastrophic. The sunken vessel was positioned to ground rather than breach an inbound tanker, ensuring the channel was blocked without producing the environmental disaster that would have shifted global political sympathy in the wrong direction. The Pacific Endeavour ran hard onto the wreck, lost momentum, and came to a halt with her bow resting on the submerged hull in the center of the inbound lane. She was immovable. She was undamaged beyond the grounding impact. And she was, as of 4:23 a.m., a 320,000-ton plug in the center of the Strait of Hormuz's inbound traffic lane. She was not alone. In the previous 11 hours, the IRGC Navy had sunk 4 pre-selected decommissioned vessels in carefully chosen positions across both the inbound and outbound lanes of the traffic separation scheme. Positions selected by Iranian naval engineers over 18 months of bathymetric analysis to maximize channel obstruction while minimizing water depth at the obstruction points, ensuring that any vessel grounding on the wrecks would do so without structural breach. A 5th vessel had been scuttled in the emergency bypass channel that international maritime pilots used when the main lanes were obstructed. And across the 47 square miles of the Strait's navigable water, IRGC Navy-fast craft had deployed an assessed field of between 80 and 120 bottom influence mines of the EM-52 and SADF variants, pressure and magnetic influence weapons capable of engaging vessels of up to 350,000 tons. By 6 a.m., 12 vessels were stopped in the strait or immediately outside it, unable to enter the mined area, unable to navigate around the grounded tanker obstructing the main inbound lane. 2 of the 12 were American-flagged. 3 were Saudi. The remainder were Kuwaiti, Emirati, and Greek-flagged commercial operators. Their combined cargo, approximately 18 million barrels of crude oil at various stages of transit. The financial impact of their combined delay was accumulating at approximately $240 million per hour across the global energy market. In Tehran, the Supreme National Security Council had convened at 4:30 a.m. to receive confirmation of the operation's success. Operation Closed Fist, as the IRGC had designated it, had been in preparation for 14 months. The legal framing had been prepared by the Foreign Ministry. The sunken vessels were Iranian maritime heritage assets placed in Iranian territorial waters under sovereign authority. The mines were a legitimate defensive measure protecting Iranian waters from hostile naval incursion, and the whole arrangement was entirely consistent with Iranian sovereign rights as interpreted under Iranian domestic law. The international community could object. It could file protests. It could convene emergency sessions of the UN Security Council. What it could not do, the SNSC had assessed, was physically clear the mines and remove the wrecks without risking the catastrophic environmental and human consequences of military action in a confined waterway containing millions of barrels of crude oil aboard stopped vessels. The calculus was straightforward. The strait was closed. Every day it remained closed cost the global economy billions of dollars and imposed mounting pressure on every government whose energy supply or economic activity depended on its operation. The United States and its allies would negotiate. They would offer concessions to reopen the passage. Iran would name its price. The price would be the end of sanctions, the release of frozen assets, the formal recognition of Iranian sovereign rights over the 9-dash equivalent of the Gulf. Operation Closed Fist was not a military operation. It was a negotiation tool of unparalleled leverage, executed in a domain, maritime chokepoint control, where Iranian geography had always given it an inherent advantage. They had made 5 catastrophic mistakes. The first mistake: 14 months of preparation had generated 14 months of intelligence collection. The NSA's collection against IRGC Navy logistics communications, the NRO's satellite imagery of vessel movements in Iranian ports, and the specific preparation of the 4 scuttling vessels, and a network of human intelligence assets reporting on Iranian naval planning had produced a comprehensive threat picture of Closed Fist that had reached high confidence 14 days before execution. 5th Fleet headquarters at Bahrain had been on maximum readiness since that assessment. The Explosive Ordnance Disposal Mobile Unit that maintained a permanent detachment in Bahrain, EODMU. 1 detachment Bahrain had been augmented with additional EOD diving teams flown in from Rota, Spain and Pearl Harbor in the preceding 10 days. The mine countermeasures pre-positioned equipment package for the strait had been quietly moved from its normal storage position to active deployment readiness at the dock facility adjacent to 5th Fleet headquarters. The response to Closed Fist had been in preparation longer than the operation itself. The second mistake: the Iranian naval engineers who had selected the scuttling positions based on bathymetric analysis had selected positions that were, from a mine countermeasures perspective, among the most operationally manageable in the strait. The bottom influence minefield's effectiveness depended on the mines remaining undiscovered long enough to engage transiting vessels. The IRGC's mine-laying operations had been conducted over 4 nights using small, fast craft operating without lights. What those craft had not known was that an MQ-9 Reaper configured with the Airborne Laser Mine Detection System, ALMDS, had been conducting classified nocturnal overflights of the strait on all 4 nights. Its laser scanning the water column below and producing a geo-referenced mine position database that was, by 4 a.m. on the morning of Closed Fist, populated with the confirmed or probable positions of 61 of the estimated 80 to 120 mines in the field. The EOD teams knew where 61 mines were before the first tanker ran aground. They would know the rest within 4 hours of daylight aerial survey. The third mistake: the 5 scuttled wrecks blocking the navigable channels had been positioned for maximum obstruction effectiveness, which meant minimum water depth above the hulls, minimum clearance to the channel edges, and maximum exposure to the naval salvage and wreck removal capabilities that the United States Navy had been developing and pre-positioning for exactly this scenario. The IRGC's planning assumption was that wreck removal in a mine channel would require weeks, that no responsible maritime authority would send salvage divers and equipment into a water column containing bottom influence mines. That assumption did not account for the EOD team's ability to clear a safe working corridor around each wreck position using their mine neutralization equipment, creating a protected operational zone in which salvage and wreck relocation work could proceed in parallel with the broader mine clearance operation. The fourth mistake: the legal and diplomatic framing of Operation Closed Fist. The assertion that the sunken vessels and mines were sovereign Iranian measures in Iranian waters collapsed at first contact with the physical reality that the blocking positions were in the traffic separation scheme's internationally designated navigable channels. not in Iranian territorial waters, and that the minefield extended significantly into Omani waters, Emirati waters, and the international waters of the Gulf of Oman approaches. The legal cover that the Foreign Ministry had prepared was demolished by the geographic coordinates of the blocking positions, which were published by Fifth Fleet in a global maritime advisory within 90 minutes of the grounding of MV Pacific Endeavour. The international community that was supposed to be deterred from action by the legal ambiguity had no ambiguity to work with. The minefield was in international waters. The wrecks were in internationally designated channels. The legal basis for a military response was unambiguous and required no Security Council deliberation. The fifth mistake, the one that made the entire strategic concept of closed fist as an indefinite negotiating tool collapse into a 41-hour clearance operation, was the assumption that the physical complexity of clearing a mined channel with obstructing wrecks in a confined waterway would impose a timeline measured in weeks. The IRGC's planning had been based on an assessment of the U.S. Navy Mine Countermeasures Force that was 12 years out of date. It did not account for the Mark 18 Mod 2 Kingfish unmanned underwater vehicle, which could survey and classify mine contacts at 4 knots across a channel width of 200 meters, producing a geo-referenced minefield picture in hours rather than days. It did not account for the AN/AQS-20A mine hunting sonar deployed from MH-60S Seahawk helicopters, which could operate simultaneously with the UUV survey to produce overlapping coverage at double the scan rate. It did not account for the Mark 56 Moab mine neutralization system, a remotely deployed shaped charge that EOD teams could place on confirmed mine contacts from safe distance without exposing divers to influence mine risk. And it did not account for the Navy supervisor of Salvage's pre-positioned Resolve-class salvage vessels, which had been at anchor in Fujairah for 11 days waiting for exactly this mission. Their crews briefed on the 5 blocking wreck positions and their removal procedures. What happened in the next 41 hours reopened the Strait of Hormuz faster than any comparable mine clearance operation in the history of naval warfare. At 5 a.m., 40 minutes after Pacific Endeavour grounded, Fifth Fleet transmitted the execute order for Operation Clear Passage to all assigned assets. The MH-60S Seahawk helicopters of Helicopter Sea Combat Squadron 26, operating from the deck of USS Bataan, which had been anchored in the Gulf of Oman approaches since 4 a.m., were airborne by 5:14 a.m. with their AN/AQS-20 ZO. Sonar systems deployed. 4 helicopters, each sweeping a 200-meter lane at 6 knots. The strait's navigable width divided into 4 sectors. By 8:30 a.m., 3.5 hours after the first helicopter began its sweep, the aerial sonar survey had produced confirmed or probable position fixes for an additional 49 mine contacts beyond the 61 already in the ALMDS database. Combined minefield picture. 110 contacts, geo-referenced, fed into the Mine Countermeasures Management System aboard USS Bataan that was coordinating the full clearance operation. The Mark 18 Mod 2 Kingfish UUVs, 4 vehicles launched from the EOD detachment's rigid hull inflatable boats, began their survey sweeps at 5:45 a.m., working the areas immediately around the 5 wreck positions to clear safe working corridors for the salvage teams. By 10 a.m., the Kingfish survey had confirmed that the working corridors around 3 of the 5 wreck positions were clear of mine contacts to a width sufficient for salvage vessel operations. The 2 remaining wreck positions had mine contacts within the required working corridor, contacts that were assigned to the Mark 56 neutralization team working behind the Kingfish sweep. The F-35As from Al Dhafra Airbase provided continuous combat air patrol over the strait throughout the clearance operation. 2 aircraft on station at all times, rotating in pairs from Al Dhafra every 90 minutes. Their radar systems sweeping for any IRGC Navy surface movement that might attempt to interfere with the clearance operation. the IRGC fast attack craft that had conducted the mine-laying operations and were still operating from their Bandar Abbas base attempted one approach toward the clearance area at 7:30 a.m. 6 craft on a south-southwest heading that would have brought them into the working area. The F-35As made radar contact at 62 miles. The IRGC craft received an emergency broadcast on VHF Channel 16 at 7:44 a.m., transmitted in Farsi by the 5th Fleet Arabic and Farsi language broadcast team at Bahrain, warning them that the area ahead was an active mine countermeasures zone, and that any vessel entering the zone would be considered a threat to personnel conducting clearance operations under international maritime law. The 6 IRGC craft reduced speed at 7:49 a.m. and turned back to Bandar Abbas at 7:53 a.m. The mine neutralization teams, EOD divers operating in the cleared corridors with the Mark 56 system, began neutralizing confirmed mine contacts at 9:15 a.m. Working outward from the wreck positions in priority, the teams neutralized 12 mine contacts in the working corridors over a 4-hour period, creating lanes through which the Resolve-class salvage vessels could approach each wreck and begin the relocation work. The first salvage operation, the removal of the blocking wreck from the inbound lane's critical choke point, which had been pinning the MV Pacific Endeavour in place since 4:23 a.m., was the priority operation. The Resolve-class vessel, ARS-50, USS Safeguard, which had been in position in the Gulf of Oman since 4:45 a.m., moved into the cleared working corridor at 11:20 a.m. Her salvage teams were in the water by 11:40 a.m. The assessment of the blocking wreck's condition, a decommissioned vessel approximately 8,000 tons displacement, deliberately scuttled with controlled flooding, confirmed that she could be refloated with compressed air injection to her main ballast spaces. The compressed air lances were in place and running by 1:30 p.m. The blocking wreck began to rise at 2:17 p.m. By 3:44 p.m. she had sufficient buoyancy to be moved, towed by USS Safeguard to a position outside the navigable channel, clear of the inbound lane. The inbound lane was open at 3:47 p.m., 11 hours and 28 minutes after Pacific Endeavour had grounded. The Pacific Endeavour's own salvage, refloating her off the wreck and clearing her from the channel, was completed by 6:30 p.m. The inbound lane was fully clear and operational. The outbound lane wreck removal required an additional 6 hours. The specific hull configuration of the blocking vessel in the outbound lane required partial dismantling before refloating was possible, using cutting equipment that the salvage teams had brought in anticipation of this contingency. The outbound lane was clear by 12:47 a.m. the following morning. The mine clearance operation continued for a further 27 hours after both lanes were physically clear, working systematically through the minefield with the Kingfish UUVs and the EOD neutralization teams. The final mine contact was neutralized at 7:22 a.m. on the second day, 41 hours and 3 minutes after Pacific Endeavour grounded on the first blocking wreck. Throughout the clearance operation, the pre-authorized strike package against the IRGC infrastructure that had executed Closed Fist was executing in parallel. At 6 a.m. on the first day, 90 minutes after the execute order, 8 F-35As from Al Dhafra launched with JASSM-ER cruise missiles assigned to the IRGC Navy's Mine Warfare Center at Bandar Abbas, the facility where the EM-52 and SADF mines had been assembled, tested, and staged for deployment. The facility received 12 JASSM-ERs in a strike pattern that collapsed the mine assembly building, the testing facility, the storage warehouse, and the pier infrastructure used for mine-laying vessel support. The capability to produce, store, and deploy mines in the volumes required for another closed-fist scale operation was permanently removed. From USS Bataan, 8 F-35Bs launched at 6:15 a.m. carrying AGM-84 Harpoon missiles assigned to the 4 IRGC Navy fast patrol boat vessels that had laid the majority of the minefield, vessels whose identities had been confirmed by the ALMDS imagery, which had captured their registration numbers and hull configurations during the nocturnal mine-laying operations. All 4 vessels were at their pier positions at Bandar Abbas, when the harpoons arrived at 7:09 a.m. All four rendered inoperable at pier. From Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, 6 additional F-35As launched at 7:30 a.m. carrying JASSM-ERs assigned to the IRGC Navy's operational planning facility at Qeshm Island, the command node that had managed closed fists execution, whose location had been confirmed by NSA collection assets 3 months earlier, and the IRGC Navy's Salvage Prevention Equipment Depot at Larak Island, which housed the reserve mine inventory and the additional scuttling vessel preparation equipment. The Qeshm facility received 6 JASSM-ERs at 8:14 a.m. Structural collapse confirmed. The Larak depot received 6 JASSM-ERs at 8:19 a.m. Secondary detonations assessed as consistent with stored mine propellant. By 9 a.m. on the first day, 4 hours and 40 minutes after the execute order, every IRGC Navy installation directly responsible for Operation Closed Fist had been rendered inoperable. The final accounting was documented over the subsequent 72 hours. Mines deployed by IRGC in the Strait. 110 confirmed contacts in minefield database. Mines neutralized by EOD teams and MK-56 system, 110. Mines that engaged any vessel during or after the clearance operation, 0. Blocking wrecks removed from navigable channels, 5 of 5. Time from first grounding to inbound lane clearance, 11 hours 28 minutes. Time from first grounding to complete minefield neutralization, 41 hours 3 minutes. Vessels delayed by the closure, 12. All 12 resumed transit within 6 hours of channel clearance. MV Pacific Endeavour structural assessment. Minor hull damage from grounding, cleared for transit under her own power by the evening of the first day. IRGC Navy Mine Warfare Center at Bandar Abbas, permanently inoperable. 4 mine-laying patrol vessels, all 4 rendered inoperable at pier. IRGC Qeshm Island, operational planning facility, permanently inoperable. Larak Island Reserve Depot, rendered inoperable with assessed total loss of stored inventory. American personnel having sustained any injury across the entire operation. 2 EOD divers sustained minor cuts during wreck assessment diving operations, both treated by the USS Safeguard's medical team and returned to operations. No serious injuries, no other American casualties. The Strait was fully clear and operating at normal traffic capacity by the morning of the second day. The 12 stopped vessels completed their transits by noon. The crude oil markets, which had spiked 11% in the first hours after the closure was announced, reversed completely within 6 hours of the inbound lane clearance announcement. By the end of the second day, prices had returned to pre-incident levels. In Tehran, the SNSC received a damage assessment on the morning of the second day that described the destruction of every IRGC Navy asset associated with Operation Closed Fist, the clearance of both transit lanes, and the normalization of crude oil markets. The leverage that was supposed to last weeks had lasted less than 2 days. The Strait of Hormuz was open. The tankers were moving. The energy markets were stable. This is what happens when you plan a mine-laying and channel-blocking operation in a waterway your adversary has been surveying and pre-positioning mine countermeasures assets against for longer than you have been planning to close it. This is what happens when your minefield is laid at night in a strait where a laser-equipped unmanned aircraft was recording the position of every weapon you put in the water and feeding those positions into a database the EOD teams had ready before your first tanker ran aground. The strait is open. The tankers are moving. They never really stopped.